I have a short biography of Norman Borlaug that I wrote. I don't know if one, you know about it, two, if you've looked at it, but if you haven't, it would be worth looking at. It's got some, photos in it, and it's got a lot of text. I wrote it as a tribute to him shortly after he passed away. And then it's been updated with the unveiling of his statue in 2014.
Which is an amazing statue
Yes.
in the rotunda. I think
Yes.
much better than the one of Mr. Harlan, but that's okay.
But, yes, yeah. So I was, chairman of the committee that raised all the money, picked the artist, designed the statue, arranged for it to be shipped there, and then had the ultimate struggle with the architect of the Capitol about where the statue would be located. Because the rules, the precedent that they used was wherever your statue that's going home was, that's where the new statue goes. So Borlaug would have been down the hallway in the Senate in Harlan's place. And and we wanted Borlaug to be in Statuary Hall, where Governor Kirkwood's statue was, and we wanted him to go down the hall and take Harlan's place. And that only got resolved 4 days before the statue was to be moved in and unveiled. So Norm's there in Statuary Hall, in the good location, because I put down the architect of the Capitol in the struggle. So, all right.
Okay, gentlemen, nice and loud, your first question. Keegan, are you in charge of that one? Okay, go.
This year's theme is triumph and tragedy. How do you think Norman Borlaug's work relates to the theme?
Borlaug's work is linked directly to this theme of triumph and tragedy. And I would say it's probably, the title would be Triumph that Averted a Tragedy. So Borlaug's great achievement, for which he received the Nobel Peace Prize, was that working for 2 decades in Mexico, he finally developed a miracle wheat, as I like to call it, that could resist disease and increase the yield of a plant 3 or 4 times. And it transformed Mexican agriculture. But in the early 1960s, the prospect of famine, mass starvation, and millions, if not hundreds of millions of deaths haunted India and Pakistan. The tragedy could clearly be seen on the horizon. And it had already occurred in Bangladesh when the great Bengal famine had taken place. And the number of deaths were astronomical. And now it was coming to India and Pakistan. And the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization urged Borlaug to go to India. And that request was also reinforced by a young scientist named M.S. Swaminathan. And there's a huge mosaic of Swaminathan right below where we are right now, as he was the first World Food Prize laureate. But he and Borlaug had met actually 10 years earlier at a conference at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. It was a conference on genetics. and they went across the street to a place called Renenbaum's Drugstore. The physical building's not there anymore. And they sat together and had coffee or tea, whatever, and their relationship began there. I like to tell people that the Green Revolution, which is what this whole period that Borlaug initiated, really began at Renenbaum's Drugstore in Madison, Wisconsin in 1953. And I tell them that, people go, what? What are you talking about? So 10 years later, now it's 1963. Borlaug, at the request of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, which is headquartered in Rome, arrives in India. I don't remember the date, but the date that he first stepped foot on Indian soil was so important that after his death, the Indian ambassador in Washington, D.C., held a reception to celebrate just that. Just that. What was the first day this American farm boy from northeast Iowa set foot on Indian soil? Can you imagine how revered someone has to be that another country would hold an event like that to say his role is so big. He is such a hero to us that we want to celebrate the day he came. So Borlaug got there, and India was already worried with the prospect of this tragedy. And in several visits over the next several years, Borlaug eventually convinces the political leaders of both countries to not only use his new seeds that he developed in Mexico, but his whole approach to agriculture. His approach to agriculture was using fertilizer, using insecticides, and research and science to develop seeds that work best in a local situation. And all of this was so impactful, brought such immediate change, that both countries went from expecting mass food deficits and famine, starvation, and deaths to being self-sufficient, and then beginning exporting in just 3 or 4 years. And so as a result, in 1970, as Borlaug is back in Mexico, and he's working out in the fields, and they're actually kind of an hour or two from his home where he lived, and his wife was there, his wife whom he had met at the University of Minnesota when he was an undergraduate and then a graduate student there. And she gets a phone call and gets in her car and drives the 2 hours. And she finds Dr. Borlaug out in the field, working. And as it was described to me by one of his students, who's a good friend, that she's running across the field, shouting at him, Norm, you have to come home and phone Norway. You've won the Nobel Peace Prize. So Norm Borlaug, he's this phlegmatic Norwegian, Scandinavian from northern Iowa, not given to any big emotion or anything. He hears her, gets kind of a frown on his face, looks up at the sky, and he says, there's a couple of hours of light left. We have a lot of work to do. I can't possibly leave. Go home. And he sends his wife away. So imagine the scene, the TV trucks with their big bright lights find him, and they're out there in this Mexican field in Sonora near the town of Obregon. It's quite dark. The lights are illuminating him as he's being interviewed to be on Mexican TV. So just like in India, where he is so revered, people celebrate the day he stepped foot on Indian soil. In Obregon and in rural Mexico, they too revere Norman Borlaug and hold him up to great acclaim, and have him had his both places have had Borlaug statues created and erected and put up on their soil. Nicole